Hello, everyone. My name is Lydia Bronner, and I'm the Associate Curator of Public Programs here at the Museum of Arts and Design. On behalf of myself and everyone at the museum, we are delighted that you'll be spending the next roughly hour with us for this special program celebrating 45 stories in jewelry. If you've ever wondered how museums decide what objects to acquire for their collection or how they decide what to show in exhibitions, this program is for you. We're here for an inside look at how these decisions were made in this permanent collection show, 45 Stories in Jewelry, 1947 to now, which is an exhibition that celebrates the artists and supporters who have shaped the field of studio and contemporary jewelry in the United States. In the case of this project, which will be in the Mad Galleries for years to come, a committee was assembled to debate all of the jewelry pieces in the collection and ultimately decide the criteria for which objects would be chosen and recommended for acquisition. Our museum is now open to socially distanced visits. And if you'd like to know more about the museum and our offerings, if you'd like to sign up for our mailing list, or if you want more information about membership, which is one of the engines that drives all the work we're able to do, please check our website. I really encourage everyone to stop by and check out this extraordinary show. And without further ado, I'll bring on Mad Associate Curator Barbara Paris Gifford to tell you more. Hello, Barbara.
Hi, Lydia. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. It is a privilege to be with the people today that I'm about ready to introduce, who were absolutely 100% responsible for putting this show together and for working with me. I think we worked on this for over 2.5 years, something like that. At any rate, I'm going to introduce you to each person. This was the 45 Stories committee that we assembled. I'm going to give short introductions in the interest of time, and I'm going to do so alphabetically. So there are 6 people altogether, plus me, that were part of the committee that put together this permanent collection exhibition. So the first person I'm going to introduce is Erin Daily. Erin is a jewelry artist and co-founder of Brooklyn Metalworks and the gallery Specific Gravity. She has been an instructor at SUNY New Paltz, the University of Arts in Philadelphia, the 92nd Street Y, and Snow Farm, the New England Craft Center. Importantly, she is an advocate, active in social and environmental issues around sound practices in the jewelry sector. Welcome, Erin.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. I'll get to you in a minute, Brian, but unfortunately, your last name starts with a W, so I believe you're the last one.
Lifelong problem.
The next person is Toni Greenbaum. Toni is a jewelry historian, collector, author of several articles and publications, including the important Messengers of Modernism and the newest book, really fabulous, on the jeweler Sam Kramer, who incidentally is also in 45 Stories, called Sam Kramer, Jeweler on the Edge. And she is a professor of theory and criticism of contemporary jewelry at Pratt. Welcome, Toni. It is a pleasure and honor to have you here today. Thank you so much, and always.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Bella Neyman is next up. Bella is an important jewelry historian, a collector, a gallerist, a curator and writer, and of course, the co-founder of New York City Jewelry Week, for which this program was made, and also Platforma, and she is also a board member of Art Jewelry Farm. Welcome, Bella. Sasha Nixon is our next committee member. Sasha is a jewelry historian, curator. She is a practicing metalsmith and recipient of the 2018 Wingate Curatorial Internship and the recipient of the 2018 Society of North American Goldsmiths Emerging Curators Grant. She was a co-curator along with me of Fake News and True Love, an exhibition we did on Robert Baines in 2018. And she was the curator of A View from the Jeweler's Bench, Ancient Treasures, Contemporary Statements at the Bard Graduate Center Gallery in 2019. She was very much soup to nuts on this whole exhibition because she is currently part of our exhibitions team. So not only did she participate in this committee and is a jeweler herself, she also mounted all the jewelry and was very integral to a lot of the design for the show. So Sasha, welcome. Timothy Veske-McMahon is a conceptual jewelry artist, educator, critic, and writer, and he is currently the Associate Professor and Graduate Program Director of Jewelry and Metalsmithing at the Rhode Island School of Design. Welcome, Timothy. And lastly, what's that?
Just great to see everyone.
Oh yes, great to see you too. And lastly, we have Brian Weissman. And he is sitting next to Erin, right there on that beautiful white couch. Brian is a jewelry artist as well and co-founder of Brooklyn Metal Works and the gallery Specific Gravity. He's an instructor, and he's been an instructor at the 92nd Street Y, SUNY New Paltz, Snow Farm, the New England Craft Center, and FIT. And he was also a past participant in MAD's Artist Studio residency program. So welcome, Brian. So that's everybody. We're all on screen now. So for this,
but Brian, are you a jeweler?
I guess I am.
He is now. That's how his career is made.
Proud jeweler. Yeah, I guess. Suddenly a jeweler.
Suddenly a jeweler. Okay, so to get us started, I'm just going to kind of outline the sort of issue as it came up for us and what was really the impetus for doing 45 stories in jewelry. So to do that, we're going to start with a PowerPoint that Tuda was going to put on the screen. So when I began at the Museum of Arts and Design, I was an intern for the wonderful Ursula Ilse Neyman. And we were lucky enough at the museum, we are lucky enough to have this wonderful jewelry gallery. And it is a place where we just show, for the most part, contemporary jewelry. So it's only for the display of jewelry, which is a very, very unique kind of attribute for a museum to have. And the goal of this jewelry gallery was to really educate visitors about studio and contemporary art jewelry from the mid-century to today. So not a lot of people know a lot about this jewelry. And indeed, it is very, very different looking. So it was a wonderful, wonderful way to really tell people about this jewelry. And so the next slide, please. And just to give you a little bit of background, here are the drawers that exist within this gallery. And you can see here visitors looking at pieces. I believe that was during the Ebony Patterson exhibition. The museum is very, very committed to this particular medium and started collecting studio jewelry in 1956, which was the year that the museum opened. Today, it has over 930 pieces, and I'm happy to say after this project, we now have about 950 pieces of studio and contemporary jewelry. Yeah, that represents about a third of our holdings. So it's a really wonderful collection. It's unique in that it grew with the category. So our museum came about at the same time as sort of this category came about, and we kind of grew together. So it has that kind of unique history that, you know, it's not a collection that we have, you know, inherited from a wonderful collector, as some museums are. It actually grew in tandem. So as a result, there's a lot of really wonderful, wonderful pieces and a lot of wonderful risk-taking, I think, that happened over the years in terms of the artists that MAD supported. So next slide, please. So in looking at this jewelry and knowing how different it is, we wanted to make sure that people really understood what it was, that we could really educate people about this really wonderful and unique category within the field of jewelry. So the issue became, what do we display? And what story do we tell? And you know, what is our collection and what is it made up of? So we had done an analysis, kind of a quantitative analysis about our collection. And we didn't unfortunately have a lot of in-depth data about the collection, but we were able to tell some things. And one thing is that, you know, our collection is predominantly female, made by female artists, that is. Next slide, please. About 47% of the collection is from artists in the United States. So it had very much a US focus. The second country would be Germany that was represented. And after that, there's a lot of Dutch and Japanese artists. So we were able to tell, you know, where the artists in our collection were from. And very much like the category, it's international in nature, but very focused obviously on the US, given that we're a US institution. And again, the category grew along with us. So we collected over time, which also has to do with the fact that it's very US centric. Next slide, please. And we also knew the year, obviously, in which the pieces in our collection, the years in which they were made. So we had representation from the 1940s forward. Some decades were more represented than others. And that just really has to do with how we collected and different times in which we were able to take in more work versus times that we were unable to do. And that has to really do with space and storage and, you know, philosophy toward collecting and so on and so forth. But we were able to know these things, which was really a good thing. Next. And if we take a closer look, there were certain areas in which we had strength. Next slide, please. Mid-century modernism, which makes sense given the year that we opened forward. Next, please. Jewelry from the 60s and the 70s, American and European jewelry. And this is when the category is really growing exponentially and kind of coming on the scene in both Europe and America. Next, the United States. We had a lot of pieces around the subject of gold. So not necessarily gold pieces, but you know, metalsmiths that were challenging ideas about gold as well as gold pieces. Next. And we had a lot of paper and fiber jewelry. So a lot of work that had to do with the other aspects of craft, you know, metal, fiber. We have a lot of wood pieces and so on and so forth. Next. And obviously a lot of pieces made with found objects, which, you know, of course, studio and contemporary jewelry for the most part is about alternative materials, found objects being very strongly represented. Next. We had a lot of, you know, in wearables and quotes, because a lot of the work that we have was very sort of large and abstract, kind of exploring the boundaries of jewelry and asking the question of what is jewelry. So there was a lot of jewelry sort of in that vein. And next. A lot about nature, a lot about environmentalism. Next. Enamel works, really from the inception forward. Next. And wearable technology. And significantly, we have this amazing collection of Marianne Scher's work from the 1969, I believe, forward, And she was using very, very early technology in her pieces, which allowed us really to have this story from a really early age. And the challenge was to see if we really had that technology story all the way through today. Which brings up another issue, which is, you know, a lot of collections have holes in them. And in doing this analysis with this great group of people, we were really able to see what stories we had very strongly from the beginning that maybe dropped out, that we needed to kind of shore up. So that was something that we also kind of looked at. Next, please. So here we are again at these drawers, and you will see that when it used to be, when you opened up those drawers, you would see a piece of jewelry and you'd see a label with just basic information, but you wouldn't necessarily know in looking at these pieces and you know, what those pieces were really about. And if the purpose of this gallery is to educate, you know, how do we do that better? You know, what kind of an idea can we come up with that maybe would tell people a little bit more, but would be snackable information so that they could open a drawer easily and learn something maybe a little bit more than just looking at the piece. There's that wonderful Bruce Metcalf piece you see there. Obviously, it's a very different looking piece of jewelry. Perhaps there were stories that were supposed to go along with that. There's maybe more meaning in what he's trying to do there. But as a visitor, you may not really understand what that intention was. And so the idea behind this project was really for artists to, visitors to understand the intentions that the artists were hoping people to understand. And of course, usually jewelry has a person and it's being worn. And so, for example, you might take that Bruce Metcalf and wear that piece and you'd be out in the world and, you know, somebody might encounter you and ask you about it. And that would be, jewelry's like that. It's very much a social medium. And the wearer would be able to tell you about it. But in drawers like this, you don't really have that opportunity. So that was really what we were trying to do was, you know, make sure that people were walking away with the intentions of these pieces. Next slide, please. So the other kind of insight in learning more about this category of jewelry is that there's always been really fantastic, it's a very passionate field. People are very passionately involved in this field. There's a lot of amazing scholarship behind it. And I really wanted that to be represented in this as well. That was, I wanted to honor the history and the, you know, the knowledge that had gone on in this field properly. So I also wanted to make sure that, that, you know, I knew all the pieces that should really be involved. So I thought the best way to do that was to have a committee that we could really discuss ideas, we could discuss the jewelry. I'm not a maker myself, so I very much needed that perspective. I was fairly fresh to the field, so I didn't necessarily know everything that had gone on in the field. So this committee became very, very important so that we could really put together the best selection of jewelry within 45 stories, which incidentally, I did not mention there are 45 drawers, which is why this is called 45 Stories in Jewelry. So I set about thinking about who to be on the committee, and the people that I introduced to you earlier were chosen because they are experts in the field, because they are jewelers themselves, they really understand the making of jewelry, because they're important historians, they've written extensively in the field, and they have a love and a passion for this category of jewelry. The other thing is we all lived kind of near each other, which pre-COVID, that was a really important thing, to be able to kind of sit in the same room and discuss and debate. which, brings up an important question. If we were to do this today, would this still be the same committee? But these are the kinds of discussions we'll probably be getting into. At any rate, that was the kind of expertise that I was looking for on the committee. And then we needed to decide, what did we want to say with this jewelry? What were the important things in history, the important events that really needed to be a part of this, that visitors should know about? What were the gaps? And we started working together very, very early. So we were able to kind of analyze what Matt's collection was and what gaps there were, and actually acquire that work, which was nice, before the exhibition and the catalog were actually written. And then how were we going to tell this story? Were we going to invent categories? Were we going to tell it from the artist's perspective? So, so I assembled the committee, and chaos ensued.
I mean, something that for me, in the end, to me, it has become really important is just the language of it being stories and 45 stories, because it brings an understanding or awareness that these are just 45 stories, and a story is something that's based on an experience or a retelling. So there could be other stories or other experiences or other perspectives. So I think that's something that as times go on, I'm now really interested in how it's become this idea of also storytelling and what that means of like a different chapter or through someone else's experience as well.
I think it also gave us an opportunity to combine pieces from various periods, eras, geographic locations. We were kind of forced to see not necessarily a continuum, but a conversation amongst pieces that could aid our narrative, our storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the 45 thing was really kind of daunting, because, there are so many stories to be told. This is an international field. So, just choosing 45 and giving people a flavor was very challenging, I think.
I think also for me, this was very much about community. And, like you said, Barbara, when we all got together in a room about a year ago to work on this exhibition, we couldn't have imagined what, the following year would look like. But one thing that we've discussed, as a committee, was that this field is very much about the community, and the way we approach this exhibition, both in the stories, but also in the way, and obviously we'll speak about this later, but even the writers chosen for the catalog to speak about the pieces in the exhibition and the installation, and us coming together as a community also to have conversations about, which pieces were relevant or not. I mean, obviously all of these stories are equally relevant, right? But which pieces as a committee that, we wanted to put forth. So I think that is also so important to this exhibition, and it was so important to us as a committee too.
Yeah, and I think the other challenge in addition to the things that we're bringing up is the fact that this is a museum collection, and that in some ways it needed to say something about MAD too. So, obviously there's going to be stories that start in the 40s and the 50s, and obviously, because of our particular history, and, we did, for example, jewelry exhibitions from the very beginning. Jewelry was included in our very, very first show. We wanted to sort of highlight that history as well, the kinds of exhibitions that we've done. Paul Smith was amazing in terms of honoring a lot of really wonderful American jewelers, in particular, very early on. So those kinds of things also needed to be there as well. So there was like a lot of straddling of sort of issues.
An important part of the discussion for me that I remember was deciding to focus the stories around artists as opposed to around themes. This allowed the authors that we selected, because of their particular avenue of study or their relationship to an artist, to really branch out and discuss what they felt was the most important thing about that particular piece that was in Matt's collection or about the artists themselves, and gave them a freedom that wouldn't have been present if we had just decided that we were going to discuss it in relation to themes, which we were afraid would pigeonhole the artist and their work into a narrower lens that we wanted to avoid.
Yeah, that was a very important decision, I think, because we very easily could have said, you know, modernist jewelry, you know, geometric jewelry, narrative jewelry. We very easily could have done that. We very easily could have, you know, pigeonholed, but, and in some ways that might have been easier for the visitor because they could, you know, discern the major themes much more easily. But in this case, we just really wanted those stories to be told through the artists and through their work. Because as you say, we didn't want to pigeonhole artists to say, oh, your work is about geometry, therefore you will be in the geometric category. But instead allow them to kind of say their story through their chosen artists, because in a lot of cases, authors rather, you know, if the jeweler was alive, we allowed them to weigh in on the author choice. And through reading that story, the visitor then could say, oh, okay, well, then that story is here, so that must be a major kind of development that happened.
I also think one of the most compelling things for the visitor to the exhibition is the surprise element, the unexpected. You know, the juxtapositions that we created that really were not the norm, not what people would think of or anticipate. And I think that helped really propel the stories and make them more memorable to people who view the exhibition and ultimately the permanent collection when it goes back into the drawers.
Yeah, and I think that opportunity really came out in the decision not to do it chronologically.
Right.
Because, you know, you then could think of all the artists that are in the exhibition, and you could think, you know, if you did want to choose 2 artists, for example, or I think in the case of Erin, she chose 4 artists. You know, you could talk about these really, really interesting stories across artists who were from different time periods. And that provided a really interesting insight.
Time periods and different countries, different geographic locations.
And different geographic locations.
Completely unexpected juxtapositions amongst them.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think will resonate with the public. I think they will better remember the pieces, seeing it in these unexpected contexts.
Mm-hmm.
I think in a way that also made it fun for us as well to take a deeper look at the collection, right? Because, you know, it's like you were saying, there's over 900 pieces in the collection. And for us, the first point was kind of, you know, we had to learn all these pieces as well. You know, I really remember receiving the binder with all of the pieces and sort of going through it with such joy and feeling like, oh my God, like I get this peek and, you know, at this treasure. And so for us as the committee, that made it really much more exciting as well to figure out how to best pair the pieces. And so I hope that excitement then also comes through to the visitor as well.
Yeah, that's a good thing to bring up, the binder, which Sasha put together, because Sasha at that point was a Center of Craft intern with me. This was before she had her big job now at the museum. But at any rate, yes, there was a very big binder, And we all like looked at all the jewelry. There it is.
There it is. I have it.
We all debated, all 920 pieces. We had periods where we selected our top 20 choices, and each of us put up those 20 choices, I think it was, and we voted on it, and then we debated it. And then we also, when we got deeply into that, realized, gee, I wish we had X piece. I wish we had Y piece. I wish we could tell this particular story, but there really isn't the right piece to tell that story or the right artist to tell that story. So as excited as we will become about being able to tell one story and tell it well, there were also some frustrations.
Yeah, well, the gaps became more apparent.
Yeah.
There was also the consideration of what had been in the drawers up until that point. Because
Yes.
While this is a very comprehensive overview of the collection at MAD, we certainly wanted to make room for new tellings, new stories. So there was a dynamic at play between what had occurred in the past and what we wanted to put forward. So there was a big consideration in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because really the drawers that we had, the pieces that were in the drawers had been there since 2008. So it was a really long period of time. So it didn't really quite make sense to then again use those pieces for this run, which will likely be as long, and while ignoring other pieces that were in the collection that should have been out there.
Well, my hope is that this is an opportunity for the museum to sometime in the future do this show again, right? Because these are 45 stories that are relevant right now, or that we think were worth teasing out of the permanent collection. But hopefully the museum will continue, it's building its collection, and then at some point down the line, it'll take another opportunity to look at new stories.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I would really love to be able to do that, and it's hard right now to kind of talk about these sorts of wishes in the middle of COVID, when a lot of arts institutions are suffering so badly. But it would be really, really wonderful to be able to change out these stories over time, and definitely keep a relevance. I mean, we did acquire work up to 2019. We did make a concerted effort to design the show so that the information was easily digestible, almost like an Instagram, kind of post, so that people could open up the drawers and, see a visual and see the jewelry and sort of get an idea very quickly about what was going on. There are certain things that, of course, we certain histories that will always be there, right? Like, the beginning of like modernism and themes that went along with that, the Danish influence, the proliferation of alternative materials, the exploration of alternative materials, the exploration of wearability. Like there are a lot of different themes that of course would be kept, but I think we all feel that in some ways the 21st century is just beginning now, and a lot of new developments will happen that we'll need to chart and we'll need to include. And we're lucky enough too in 45 and in the museum's collection to have collected work from like the Vietnam War protests, and from La Frontera, and so on and so forth, like other kinds of, jewelry that captures feminist themes and things like that. But certainly, I think we all know that we need to be doing more to this end.
Yeah, I think the collection is kind of a living thing. It's like always growing, hopefully, and things change. So hopefully at some point, like there's some really incredible pieces that are not in the show, but are part of the permanent collection. And, you know, the museum just has the opportunity to always be refreshing and always looking at what it has and what it doesn't have. So
the museum has digital archives that are viewable online, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And of course, an image is only part of the story. One of the issues that we also contended with our selection was scale. There were a few pieces that weren't sized appropriately for drawers, and were able to be viewable in the broader exhibition that's currently up at the museum. But that's always a very interesting moment for jewelry, because we have this notion that it is a certain size, and then certainly some of these pieces are much larger than that.
And that's certainly a bias of a drawer, for sure. Yeah.
but the display of the show is just absolutely incredible, because it takes all those 45 drawers and then makes them visible, and like the graphic design that was included and the storytelling that was involved with each piece, it really takes it, you know, out of the drawer and makes it very accessible to the public. So it's a really beautiful show on top of everything else.
So maybe we should show some images of where we ended up going. I know we have other topics to explore, but this might be a good time, given what Brian just said, to show the people watching, you know, what we ended up doing. So Tudo, could you please show the PowerPoint again? So here we are again, and you see how the drawers were. And then you see this is a rendering of what they would become. So generally speaking, the formula was an image, and this is about this particular, we'll see this later, but this particular drawer is about paper jewelry, Wendy Ramshaw and David Watkins paper jewelry, and which was a very, very big thing in the 60s, particularly in Britain. And there's an image of Twiggy, and she's wearing their jewelry along with the jewelry that was a DIY sort of affair. And the story was written by Pat Kirkham. So each of the, who is an expert on that particular time period. So each of the stories are only 100 words long. And then the piece next to it is the Art Smith story. So that's kind of, you see here, the transformation of what became of the drawers. And then I have to say, the museum got very excited about this drawer project and decided to make it an exhibition. So while it was meant for these drawers, our very first articulation of this is actually in the galleries, which is really awesome. So let's show the next slides. So these are just more of the drawers that are in the show. This is the Art Smith drawer, La Frontera. There's the drawer that Toni wrote about of Sam Kramer and Carl Fritsch. And then the Tone Vigeland drawer. And let's go on. And those are the actual drawers. So now we're in the gallery. And again, these drawers will be put into that cabinet that we've been referring to, but this is how it looks now. So much more sort of visual with the pieces and a little story. Go on. Oh, go ahead.
From like a design perspective, and we were talking about adding or changing out the stories later, I think that what was really nice about this project is that it is modular in that way, because each of the stories during the design process was kind of treated as its own kind of mini exhibition. So they're all so different. And I think when they move into the drawers, that will add to that element of surprise, because you can open Sam Kramer's bright acid green drawer, and then the next one will be treated in a very different way. Like, you know, we had a gilt frame in one of them. And so I think that adds to the element of discovery and allows for, you know, swapping out and change through time, which is great.
Yeah.
Also, the addition of the graphic elements, you know, period magazine photos, you know, Twiggy wearing that paper jewelry in David and Wendy's drawer, adds so much to that story, so much excitement and context, relevant context.
Yeah, you get to see how, you know, how much a part of their time these pieces were, you know, how activated they were. And yeah, in that particular drawer, you really see that. It was also nice to be able to treat, as Sasha is saying, like every single piece differently, instead of saying, okay, the background is going to be gray and everybody's going to be on a gray background. This really allowed for the individualism of each of these jewelers and each of these stories to be honored.
Well, sorry.
Okay.
And well, and also thinking about, I mean, looking at the installation here, I mean, I think of this wonderful dinner party, right? Like everybody sort of sitting around the table together, which I know we also talked a lot about as we were sitting around the table, you know, thinking of these pairings, but then also thinking about the exhibition once, you know, it goes into the drawers. One of my favorite experiences with MAD is really seeing, you know, visitors to the museum pull the drawers out and look at the jewelry and having an opportunity to interact with it much more than they can really interact with a lot of other objects in the museum's collection. And so essentially we're sort of leaving everyone, you know, to their own devices. But, you know, when they're pulling out the drawers, by providing them, like Toni was saying, with this sort of context, right, with additional images, we're essentially not leaving the viewer on their own. We're sort of there to continue to, you know, tell that story, you know, for them, sort of as they get to experience the exhibition in years to come. So I thought that was interesting too, just thinking about kind of the end user and how they get to experience the individual drawers.
Yeah, and also keeping in mind that the purpose is an educational one. So we really are educating about this category. So in some cases, you might think when you look at this, wow, this is kind of heavy-handed in some ways. You should let the jewelry speak for itself. And I think a lot of jewelry artists really feel that way, that their pieces speak for themselves. And I don't disagree with that. But at the same time, if you know, as an institution, you are educating people about something, it really helps to have that context, and it really helps to make fans of the category, frankly. It helps to bring more people kind of into our fold when they realize that this jewelry really has a lot to say. I also wanted to mention that part of the exhibition part of this is, you know, these wonderful videos of, you know, Ramona Solberg and Otto Kunzli and Joyce Scott and Bruno Martinozzi, you know, talking about their jewelry. So people get to even a further, develop a further relationship with those artists. And, you know, it's also important to note that the jewelry is not arranged chronologically, and the stories, and they won't be arranged chronologically either when they go into the drawers, into the cabinet, but there are relationships between each of them, and it's kind of fun to figure out what those relationships are. And in fact, what we're looking at here now, you have Otto Kunzli's drawer there in the middle, and you know, all of his students, many of his students anyway, are near him. So you have these kind of personal relationships, which really adds to the sort of the dining table kind of concept, because these are, if you will, dining tables of artists who actually know each other and like know their work. And so it's sort of lively in that way. And that shape also echoes the elliptical shape in the jewelry gallery. So there's a nice little nod there too, to sort of MAD's history and commitment to the field. Next slide, please. And this is what the jewelry gallery looks like now. So you have more of the drawers that are vertical, and then there's a timeline if people want that experience to know like what happened before what. So that was also included. Any limitations that we want to talk about? And this is the timeline again, a different view of the timeline.
I mean, I think we can't stress not truly as a limitation, but just the role that the work and the collection, and as you really laid out in the beginning in the PowerPoint of like, it's really good at telling some of these material stories. It's really rooted in time in certain places. So I think although there were the 6 of us lending ourselves and our way of looking and our personal knowledge outside of the collection in the museum, I think still the work, the binder, you know, really at times was not a burden, but it was that thing that was our reality check, you know, as was mentioned, the size of the drawer, right? And whether or not just the piece was too big, but if a concept or a story was too complicated to rightly say in a certain size of space, you know, with an X amount of pieces. So I think that's one thing that for me always sticks out is it is so much us and our way of looking, but still the power of the collection and making itself known in these stories. Really, it's what I think I see so much is like that behind, that knowledge of behind of those other pieces waiting in the wings, or why one piece went in and not another. And that's where the real excitement for me is knowing that new pieces entered the collection, and that as a group, we all, you know, had ideas about other things that could come in, and maybe in the future they do. So this idea of us all looking backwards, but then laying out ideas of what maybe could also be coming down the line or be oriented towards the future. I think that's what's this really exciting thing, that this will be up for a while, but the ripples of it will continue, and we'll, as the group of us, I hope, be able to identify some of those.
Yes, to that end, are there stories that you wish we could tell next?
I do think a lot about, I personally, not related to jewelry, but I love the New York Times Overlooked project. And it's the project where they go and write the obituaries that never were written in the New York Times or didn't appear, about significant people, first people in all different categories. And so there's a component of that, like that wasn't our task. I think we arrived in some ways about work that needed to be there, but because we were so focused as well on the collection, I think there's this other side of it of also like what's so other from this collection, or what is so a new way of looking that we weren't looking or thinking about when there were reasons to collect in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So that kind of movement as well.
One of the things that I wanted to mention that I found interesting about my education process throughout this committee work was how museums acquire new pieces, and that often it comes from exhibitions that have been held at the institution at MAD. And there's a moment of, for us, it was lucky and interesting that we were holding these conversations in a moment where nonstick nostalgia was happening currently at the museum, which was a wonderful jewelry exhibition curated by Kelly Riggs, and promoting the work of younger artists that hadn't really been seen at a museum before. And so that provided us an opportunity to have access to work and artists that maybe otherwise we wouldn't have. And I think that is, you know, one of those insider views that I hadn't understood as much before. And I don't know, Barbara, on your part, how much of that was organized by you, but it was very fascinating to me that we were able to utilize some of the work from that exhibition to come in and advocate for it, for the inclusion in this exhibition.
No, that was a wonderful opportunity. And of course, you know, we did come up with a list, and our list is quite extensive, and I will use that list, you know, for years to come in terms of the pieces that I really like to collect, because of course there was a lot of really good thinking that went into developing that list. But we were able to acquire, I think we acquired like 11 pieces already as a result of the work that we did on 45. And those ended up being incorporated into the drawers. And it included a lot of young artists that are working in the field today. So that was really a wonderful opportunity. The other thing that is always really fascinating to me is that each curator or director has a sort of a different bent in terms of how they see the category and how they see what they need to collect. So it was interesting sort of going through, you know, the Paul Smith years or the Ursula years, or the, you know, David McFadden and the kinds of pieces that he brought into the collection. And I really see my role as, you know, filling in gaps and making sure that this collection is as encyclopedic as it can be, and also making sure, obviously, as we go forward, that it is much more diverse. It's actually kind of diverse, you know, and I say kind of diverse because I'm not going to like check that box at all. But I think, you know, in comparison to many museums, MAD in general has done a very good job with that. We still have a lot of more work to do, obviously. But, you know, and unfortunately, we don't collect a lot of information that we need to collect. Like we don't collect, you know, identity, for example. We don't collect, you know, more in-depth sort of gender and sexuality kinds of data on each of the artists. So we're very limited when we look back to know exactly, you know, to take really an in-depth look at identity, which we're also working on. So, so that we can be more aware of that going forward in the future. But I know this group, we tried really hard to make sure that a diverse group of voices were heard. And we could do better on that front, definitely. So anything else you want to add?
I think I'm very excited about the catalog for the exhibition because it was an interesting challenge for us as a group to come up with a list of possible authors for the different stories. Mm-hmm. And I feel like by this book existing, we have a whole new group of people to draw on for future publications possibly, or just general research. I think it was a nice list of people, also a diverse list of people who mm-hmm. wrote for this, and I'm looking forward to reading it.
Yeah, we had I think we had 42 different writers for this project, which is really a lot and amazing. And each of their voices are very different. Some of my favorite ones are, I mean, the obvious, the scholars. It was such an honor to have the greatest scholars in the field contribute to this project. But also, like Thomas Gentile writing about John Paul Miller, who was his professor, you know, Joyce Scott writing about Art Smith, who was her mentor. You know, these are perspectives that are just so important. And I'm so glad that we were able to document those and, you know, get a little taste of that. And I'm also really excited about future scholars and them looking at jewelry stories and, you know, opening up the page, you know, to, I don't know, to Toni's page, let's say, and immediately seeing some great work by some great artists, knowing of a scholar who's written about those artists. And it's just a wonderful starting place for people doing that research in the future. So yeah, I think overall between, you know, donors and authors and artists, there was like over 300 people involved in this project, which is really quite an honor and a wonderful learning experience for sure. And I wish we could have included more, and maybe we will, obviously, in the future, hopefully.
Double-decker drawers.
Double-decker drawers. Good idea. Yeah.
Within a drawer with a sliding panel.
No, it's
Sasha looks pained at that one.
Yeah, you mount them. No, it was
yes,
a lot
Sasha,
of an interesting challenge.
Yeah, Sasha mounted all of that jewelry, and she had a team. She was in charge of the team, and you know, obviously, there's a lot of different layers between, you know, the images and the pieces of jewelry, and then of course, there's amazing conservation issues around this whole thing, because those pieces are going to be in those drawers for such a long period of time. So figuring out the right way to conserve these pieces within their environment, like, you know, there's a whole lot. And that was another really great thing too with this project. We were able to conserve a lot of really wonderful pieces that hadn't been shown in our collection for a really long time. So, and Sasha has such a great eye, like, you know, it was really great to have her part of that process.
Yeah, some pieces got some really great attention. So that's good that they got that kind of close looking. And yeah, from a mounting perspective, it was really interesting to kind of think through and talk about making sure that the pieces were taken care of in their new environment, and that, you know, they could be displayed at the slant that they are in the gallery space, or even vertical, and that they would still be all right when they went horizontal in the drawers and then people started opening and closing the drawers. So we have some really, really robust mounting solutions for them.
Yeah, it's an amazingly complex area, actually.
Yes.
Yeah. This project has really brought to the fore how important jewelry is to MAD, because we were there and we did grow with this category, and it brought a different kind of commitment, I think. I mean, the museum was always really committed to jewelry, but seeing that exhibition and seeing our identity in it, I think, was a really important moment. And I know it's something that among the curatorial team that we still talk about, you know, when we think about, you know, permanent collection exhibitions, you know, tying that identity and how tied MAD is to the identity of these categories is really an interesting way in which to talk about them that we're able to do. So that was also a really wonderful thing to see happen.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Thank you so much to all of the committee members for 45 Stories in Jewelry. This is an extraordinary show, and we are so happy that we get to live with it at the Museum of Arts and Design for many years to come. And I do encourage everybody watching to please stop by and see it. All right, thanks a lot. Goodbye.